Everybody, happy Friday. Greetings from the shed. You've probably heard of TED Talks. This is Shed Talks. Shed Talks. Outside in the shed today, we had some rain over the past couple of days. Had a little bit of water coming down in here, but nothing that Shed World can't handle. Today, I want to talk to you some about what happens in art after World War II. We're going to talk about the abstract expressionist movement. We'll talk about happenings, and I'll talk about some kind of weird and neat stuff that goes on in artwork. We're getting into the time period in art, the 1940s and up, where it seems to become increasingly complicated. Artwork from this time can be complex, and some people ironically have a hard time understanding it. So, some of the artwork that's being made seems very simplistic, like it looks like paint that was thrown onto a floor, or just big canvases with one color on it. And it seems very simple, but the artistic ideas behind it can be a little more complex, and it's the kind of stuff that turns a lot of people off of art. So you pay to go to a gallery. Like me and my friend painter Dave Roop, we went to the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, and I guess we were around 21. It was our first time, to a real city gallery, and didn't really know what to expect, but I thought there'd be some awesome stuff in there, and there was. But the main show was a retrospective of an artist named Sean Scully, who did these. A lot of times it was just a canvas that had stripes on it, or a great big canvas that had one color, or had pink pinstripes over top of white. And I really didn't know what to think about it. I didn't have any avenue to it. I didn't know how to approach it. To me, it just seemed very simplistic, and I didn't enjoy it very much. And as time goes on, as I've studied some of the history behind that, I've got more context to try to describe it. Now, still, at the end of the day, as far as my personal taste goes, well, that's not really a way to evaluate art. It's not my favorite type of artwork stylistically, but I think now I can see it more for what it is, which, in some ways is valuable, or some ways is sincere. Anyway, if you pull up the PowerPoint slideshow, slide number 1 just says abstract expressionism, and it does note that New York becomes the capital of the art world after World War II. Now, if you recall, up until this point, Paris, France was considered the capital of the art world, and it was considered the capital of the art world because that's where many advancements seem to be made, and artists all over Europe and then in the Americas were looking to France for influence as far as their artistic ideas went. World War II changed all that, and basically what happens is that Paris, France becomes the playground for the Nazi officers after it's taken over by Hitler's regime. And there was actually a show that Hitler wanted to have put on that was called Degenerate Art. And it involved modern art. It was the idea of people that had been going in directions of abstraction, changing the direction of art, the avant-garde, or the cutting edge in the art world. Hitler viewed that as being degenerate. He saw it as an example of what was wrong with some aspects of society that he was taking upon himself to fix. He thought with the Third Reich. And so this degenerate art show showed all these modern works of art, and the Nazi form of art became similar to what we saw in the Soviet Union as well, art in service of the state. And so generally, you can compare this to what happened in ancient Rome as well when it became an empire, and Hitler was a big fan of the Roman Empire. Art is seen as something to advance national society. So a version of that would be today, if artists just made artwork about how great the United States was, then that would be a version of art in service of the state. Of course, artists in the United States do all kinds of different things, and um, in Germany at the time that became prohibited. And so if you were doing artwork, something we think of as a pretty harmless activity, it could actually cause you to be arrested and some very bad things to happen. So as a result, many of the cutting edge artists from Europe come to the United States. And also, American artists are becoming internationally recognized, and New York becomes the new center of the art world. Abstract expressionist movement, the term can be a little misleading because we talked about in chapter 1 the difference between representational art as opposed to non-representational art, and the idea that abstract art is something that's still representational, but that something has changed, like the color of the line for artistic purposes. A lot of abstract expressionist works were not abstract, they were non-objective, right? And so that term becomes kind of confusing, and the terms abstract and non-objective get mixed and matched. And keep in mind that for our purposes, we're going to say abstract means still representational, but something has changed. And so don't let the term abstract expressionism throw you on that. That was a term that was probably coined by art critics, and that's how it goes. The second part of that phrase, abstract expressionism, is expressionism, and that might be a little different than what you normally think about too. We think about, for example, Van Gogh's work being very expressive because maybe we're looking at a self-portrait of Van Gogh where he looks kind of sad and dejected, and he's got these empty eyes staring into the mirror with his bandaged ear. You guys probably remember that piece. It stays with you after you see it. So he was expressing something through representation of himself, but he was also expressing things through the color and through the way that he used line, like that imposter technique with that heavy buildup of paint and the weird sense of color where things kind of have a sickly sort of yellowish green hue to them sometimes. That were other ways of him being expressive. And that's more related to abstract expressionism because it doesn't rely on a representation to make you feel things. The goal is to have feeling involved through the use of expressionistic line, expressionistic color, not necessarily representing. Well, a real basic idea of representation when it comes to expression would be I want to make a piece that expresses sadness, so I paint a picture of somebody with a sad look on their face, and that expresses sadness. Well, there are other ways to express things. An abstract expressionist work with that. We'll talk about the term action painting momentarily. Probably the best known, still today, the best known abstract expressionist painter, Jackson Pollock, referred to as a critic by as the term Jack the Dripper because of this technique that he used to create many of the paintings. So you see him in slide number 2. The canvas is on the floor. That's brand new. That was a new idea at this time. Instead of having the canvas on an easel or hanging on the wall where you knew which way up and which way was down, this was flat on the floor, so it's an all-over composition, working from all over the painting. Also, as you can see, instead of taking a brush and carefully applying paint to the surface, Jackson is dipping a brush or a stick into a bucket and then flinging it onto the canvas, creating a really new type of direction with painting. He didn't start off doing drip and splatter paintings, but that's what he's most well known for. He was a formally trained artist, and like many of these artists that we're going to look at, someone who's capable of painting anything that he wants to. So the idea that you look at something like an abstract expressionist piece or color field painting and think, well, that artist must not have been able to do anything else, that's usually not the case. Many artists that turn to abstract expressionism did so after a long period of training and a career doing other types of artwork. And then this is something that evolved. This is a style that came about. Another thing to think about, was slide number 2. There was an art critic named Clement Greenberg who was partially responsible for making Jackson Pollock famous by writing about him and hailing Jackson's art as being the cutting edge of modern art. So an idea he came up with was that the painting itself was not the art. That when you go in the gallery or museum and you see a painting on the wall, what you're looking at is a artifact. It's a record. It's something that's left over after the art has been created. So according to Greenberg, the actual art was Pollock moving around the canvas, and it probably was very dance-like, and he was very involved in the moment while he was doing that. And so that's the art, action painting, the art of action. And what we're looking at is just a remnant of that, is an artifact of that happening. And that term happening will come up later too. Here's a piece by Jackson Pollock, Autumn Rhythm. Gorgeous piece, just absolutely beautiful. Stunning and complex, energized. To view this as a different experience. If you look at it really carefully, you might say to yourself, I see something that looks like a person, or that looks like a tree to me, but that was not the goal of the piece. It was non-representational, meaning that it doesn't represent external visual subjects. And according to Clement Greenberg, we're just seeing a record of art having taken place. If you go to slide 4, you'll see work by another very famous abstract expressionist painter, Willem de Kooning. This piece actually is abstracted. It clearly represents something through the title and through the painting, and then that representation is abstracted, and it becomes more expressionistic. The use of line and color becomes less about denoting a figure and more about the artist's personal expression. And again, expression here used in a different way. The idea that, think about it this way. If you, right now, if you become angry at this video, you pick up your computer and throw it onto the floor. That was an expressive act. Just like making a painting like this could be considered an expressive act. Just one way to think about it. On to slide number 5, in which there's another piece by Willem de Kooning. De Kooning was accused of being misogynistic. He was accused of having a hatred for women because of the way some of these figures were portrayed. Gnashing teeth, big staring eyes. They're kind of frightening or sinister looking figures. Slide number 6, you'll see a piece by a painter named Mark Rothko, and this piece we would refer to as a color field painting because it's mainly consists of a large field of color. So there's an orange backdrop with a floating blue square and a blue rectangle beneath that, and a yellow thin rectangle beneath that. In some ways, an exploration of color. And if you think about the way color works, is something else that we talked about, I guess, in chapter 2. The idea that white light strikes everything, and then some of those rays are absorbed, and then some of those wavelengths are reflected back into your eye. So the red bottle that you see in the background, it's absorbing all those frequencies of light except red, which is reflecting back to us, and that's how we see color. So color is something that some people like Rothko explored, again, not as a representational thing, but as an expressionistic thing. What does color itself express? You probably have all seen things either on the TV or the internet about how color of rooms affects people's moods. So let's say if you're going to have a child, and you might do some research about how to paint its room so that it might be soothing or calming or comforting. Other times, think about the way color is used in advertising, and drive down the street and look at the signs of all the fast food restaurants, and they're red and they're orange and they're yellow. That's not by accident, that's on purpose. There has been research done about how people respond to color, and those colors are meant to make you feel desire and to make you feel hunger and excitement. So maybe there is something to color field painting. Slide number 7 shows someone observing a Mark Rothko painting, and there are stories about people standing in front of Rothko's paintings and being overwhelmed by emotion, whether that be joy or sadness. These wavelengths of color seemed to have some kind of effect on the viewer, and maybe it was a combination of the color and also the fame of someone like Mark Rothko that had an effect on the viewer. These guys were world famous, so public figures that you know today, maybe actors and actresses. First thing that comes to my mind is Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, or any of these super celebrities. At the time, these painters working in New York were just about as famous, and that's something that we don't see much out of visual artists these days. What are we? Slide number 9. I skipped over 8. PowerPoint is screwing up. Technology screw up? That's hard to believe, isn't it? So right now I've got the spinny circle going around. The abstract expressionists, when it came to the way they treated the canvas, was different in a lot of ways than it had been treated in the past. So one example of that would be Pollock laying it down on the floor and throwing paint onto it. Other examples would include unprimed canvases. Well, most of the paintings that we see up to this point, if it's an oil painting on canvas, that surface has been primed. So the canvas is coated so that it won't absorb paint, so that it'll be a very even, non-absorbing way of applying paint to it. Other artists during the abstract expressionist period treated the canvas different, and there are some like Helen Frankenthaler, who did not prime the canvas, who let the paint soak into it. That's a way of embracing materials. So that you could also make a comparison in terms of embracing materials to representation. Why use paint to represent a mountain range when paint and mountain ranges are two very different things? And so if you're going to treat paint like paint, then why put it on a primed canvas where it's very smooth and it's not absorbed and it's acting like it's not paint on canvas? Why not just leave it unprimed and let the materials do what they do? Ideas that come up during abstract expressionist movement. Hey, let's take a quick break while we restart PowerPoint, see if we can get it going again. I'll be right back. Shed Talks.